Ah yes, baseball. As American as apple pie, they say. Greetings. I'm the man behind the mask, and today, in honor of this year's World Series, we're exploring not only the first ever World Series, but also the fabled origins behind America's national pastime.
Now, children have been hitting balls with bats as long as there have been children, but baseball's most direct ancestors were two British games: cricket, a game divided into innings and supervised by umpires, and rounders, a children's stick and ball game brought to New England by the earliest colonists. It would not be long before Americans created numerous variations of the combined British sports, with names like Old Cat, Stickball, Baseball, and Town Ball to name a few, and played one version or another on college campuses, schoolyards, village greens, or even in city streets. The game varied from state to state and town to town, but the version known as Town Ball was the most popular. Under its rules, the field was square, with no foul lines and no fixed positions within it. Usually 8 to 15 would play on a side, but room could be found for as many as 50 from time to time. The feeder was the least important player, whose job it was to merely toss the ball to the striker, who was allowed to demand that the ball arrive either high or low, and could wait until he got his wish. A single out was all it took to retire a side, and a runner was out if the ball was either caught on the fly or if he was hit with the ball while running between bases.
The myth of baseball being a small-town game is only partially true, since even though most, if not all, of the men who first played the game learned to hit, throw, and catch in the towns and villages of their youth before moving to the big cities. However, the game they finally devised, the direct ancestor of the one we play today, sprang from New York City.
Sometime during the spring or summer of 1842, a group of young gentlemen began getting together in Manhattan each weekend to play one version or another of the popular game. A few years later, in September of 1845, 28 of these young men formally established themselves as the New York Knickerbocker Baseball Club, named after a volunteer fire company to which several players belonged. They played for health and recreation merely, but also showed a great interest in improving the game. Eventually, a team member named Alexander Cartwright and the team president, Doc Adams, drew up a set of new rules that changed baseball forever. Under their new rules, it was decreed that the infield be diamond-shaped rather than square, with first and third bases set 42 paces apart. Additionally, foul lines were established. Pitchers were now required to throw the ball underhand, keeping the elbow and wrist straight. The batter got 3 missed swings before he was called out, and most importantly, runners were to be tagged or thrown out, not thrown at. Though they now had a new set of rules for the game, the Knickerbockers had another problem: where to play their game, since there was less and less room to play any ball game in the crowded streets of Manhattan. To solve this dilemma, the Knickerbockers began taking a ferry to Hoboken, New Jersey, to a grassy picnic grove known as the Elysian Fields. It was here on June 19, 1846, that the Knickerbockers played their first official match under the new rules, and lost 23-1 in the prearranged game against another group of young gentlemen known as the New York Baseball Club. While their new game spread throughout the city, and young players less gentlemanly than they began to take it up, the Knickerbockers continued to refine the game's rules, including fines for swearing or questioning the umpires, and stipulating that the winning club was whoever was ahead at the end of 9 innings. By 1857, the Knickerbockers and 15 other clubs that now played by their rules banded together to form the National Association of Baseball Players, with their goals being to promote additional interest in baseball playing and regulate various matters necessary to its good government and continued respectability.
Over the years, as baseball's popularity continued to grow, it would make the transition from an amateur to a professional game, with the formation of the National Association of Professional Baseball Players in 1871, a league that would dominate the sport until it was replaced by the National League of Professional Baseball Clubs in 1876. However, the National League's supremacy would be challenged in 1882 with the formation of the American Association as a second major league.
With two major leagues now in operation, a need to determine a true national champion arose. For the first 2 years, the championship went to whoever had the best record at the end of the season, without a postseason series being played. But starting in 1884, the National League and the American Association began facing each other in a series of games at the end of the season to determine an overall champion. This first attempt at a postseason series was a match between the Providence Grays of the National League and the New York Metropolitans of the American Association at the Polo Grounds in New York City. This series was the result of a challenge issued by Metropolitans manager Jim Mutry to his National League counterpart of the Grays that called for a best-of-3 series between the clubs and for each team to put up $1,000 for a winner-take-all pot. Playing under American Association rules, the Grays defeated the New York team in the first 2 games, 6-0 and 3-1. Though a third game should never have been played, as the format was a best-of-3 and Providence clinched it in 2, Game 3 was still played with the hope of generating further revenue and ended in a 12-2 win for the Grays. Local newspapers called the series the Championship of the United States, with some papers also penning the Grays as world champions. Though the matches' formats were disorganized and would continually change from year to year, with games in the series ranging from as few as 3 to as many as 15, these early World Championship Series would continue to be held until 1890. Thanks in part to the formation of the Players' League as a third major league in 1890, the American Association would fold by 1891, since the new third league siphoned off enough talent and gate receipts in its 1-year existence to put a heavy strain on the American Association, leaving the National League as the sole major league for the sport.
These monopoly years for the National League would last until the formation of the American League in 1901. However, despite the fact that there were once again 2 major leagues in operation, there would be no attempt at a collaborative championship series in 1901 or 1902, as the National and American Leagues much rather prefer to battle each other for business supremacy. But after 2 years of bitter competition and player rating, the National and American Leagues finally made peace. And as a part of the accord, several pairs of teams squared off for interleague exhibition games after the 1903 season. One of these matches featured the 2 pennant winners, the Pittsburgh Pirates of the National League and the Boston Americans of the American League. It was this match that became known as the 1903 World Series.
This would be a best-of-9 series, with the first 3 games played in Boston, the next 4 in Pittsburgh, and the remaining 2, if necessary, back in Boston. One significant point about this series, though, was that it was an arrangement primarily between the 2 clubs rather than a formal arrangement between the 2 leagues. In other words, it was a voluntary event, a fact which would result in no World Series being held at all in 1904, and the eventual formal establishment of the World Series as a compulsory event starting in 1905. The Pittsburgh Pirates featured a powerful lineup that included legendary shortstop Honus Wagner, who hit .355 and drove in 101 runs, player-manager Fred Clark, who hit .351, and Ginger Beaumont, who hit .341 and led the league in both hits and runs. Whereas Boston had a strong pitching staff, led by Cy Young, who went 28-9 in 1903 and became the all-time wins leader that year, and also Bill Dineen and Long Tom Hughes, 2 right-handers like Young, who had won 21 games and 20 games respectively. Though Pittsburgh started off Game 1 strong, scoring 6 runs in the first 4 innings in their eventual 7-3 win, the meager 3 hits that they managed in Game 2 gave Boston the means to tie the series with a 3-0 victory. Pittsburgh's offense would pick back up in Game 3, and thanks to the pitching heroics of Deke and Felipe, the Pirates pulled ahead in the series with a 4-2 win. With the series now shifted to Pittsburgh's home field, the Pirates would increase their lead with a 5-4 win in Game 4. But after that, Boston kicked things into high gear, winning the next 4 games straight by scores of 11-2, 6-3, 7-3, and then finally capping off the series with a 3-0 win, proving that the new American League could beat the powerful National League. Though 109 years have since passed and changes to the format of the World Series have been made, the original blueprint for the Fall Classic that millions watch each year will always harken back to that voluntary exhibition series between 2 pennant winners in October of 1903.